Welcome to another episode of Estate Planning Nightmares and How to Avoid Them, the show where I get the privilege of speaking to some really cool people about the importance of estate planning and why everyone needs to do it. And naturally, the unanticipated circumstances that happen far too often when people fail to plan. Again, I'm your host, John Braddock, author of Click Here When I Die, founder of the Legacy Vault by My Life and Wishes, which is an online planning and document storage solution created to make things easier for those you love. My guest today will not be unfamiliar to you. She's my friend Heidi Thompson, the Legacy Lifeguard. And as you'll probably recall, Heidi joined us a couple of months ago, and she shared how sometimes bad things can happen to a good trust. You can go back and check it out on the episode we called Dirty Deeds and Something's Gone Missing. Briefly, before we jump in, I just want to remind you a little bit about who Heidi is. Heidi is the owner and the sole attorney of Lifeguarding Legacies, a concierge firm that does estate planning at her clients' kitchen tables. She spent 15 years in public education as a counselor and behavior coach, practicing prior to practicing law. I believe it's that background that gives her her superpower, which is taking complex ideas and breaking them down into what she calls sixth grade blog speak. And she is the author of Lifeguard Your Legacy, a book that she published to break down estate planning for Arizona. Now, Heidi has lived all over the country: Washington, Florida, Virginia, Texas, California, and of course, Arizona. And she's enjoyed this journey with her husband of 32 years, 2 grown children, and now 2 grandbabies. Now, Heidi, you have a name which I will not try and say, for all these places you live. What is that?
I'm a Washington, Flora, Virgin, Calzonian.
Okay. I love it. Yeah, I think on the first show, I kind of butchered that. So I figured I'd leave that one to you.
Yeah, at one point I had actually made it fit to supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, but yeah, that's just too much.
Yeah, take a few of the other states out of there. Today, I absolutely love chatting with Heidi. She's smart, she's engaging, she's funny, and one hell of a great attorney. So I asked her if she would come back on and talk about something that I believe is so critical: estate planning for young adults, and even more critical, planning for married couples and those who have assets and children. So a huge shout out to my own children right now. Listen and listen good. Welcome back, Heidi.
Thank you. It's so good to be back. And I'm excited today. The clever title for today is Legal Laryngitis and Grief on Steroids. And I think we'll hit on both of those topics today. But, you know, when I meet people in estate planning, it seems like they always want to tell me about their parents or their grandparents, but they don't really realize that the first stage of estate planning actually happens as young as 18. It's
Absolutely.
it seems crazy that you should have to think about this kind of thing, but as soon as you're 18, you have to give someone your legal voice. If you don't do that and you're in an accident, your parents, usually when you're a young adult, it's your parents, are going to have to go seek guardianship just to make your medical decisions and help you with help make arrangements for your financial bills. So if you don't do that, you've already created a huge liability in your life, right? So unmarried couples, we know so many people think, oh, marriage is a certificate. It's not that important. And so a lot of couples will join together, buy a house, do all the grown-up things, but never get married. They need to know, first of all, they have no legal voice for the person they're building their life with. If they don't do any estate planning, there is no recognition of partner unless you go and get some kind of legal arrangement like marriage or domestic partnership. So you have no legal voice. So the same thing, you may have lived with this person for 15 years and you get in a car accident, you can't speak for yourself. Guess who your legal voice will probably end up being through the court process that's expensive and takes time? It'll be your parents, even though you've been with that person a long time. And They'll, in the meantime, during all of that, guess who's making your medical decisions? The court system.
Oh,
It's
and the thing that we don't want is is the court system making any decisions for us, right?
no, absolutely not. I mean, do you trust the state generally? I mean,
um, well, depending on who's listening, oh, sure, I trust my government,
okay.
but I
Uh,
won't go too far there. But let me
scariest
say
words,
this.
scariest words ever uttered. I'm from the government and I'm here to help.
It's an oxymoron. Uh, so,
Exactly.
what's interesting about this is I remember when I was immortal, my 20s and 30s. Yes, I can still remember them, although it's a little foggy at this point. But I was invincible. Nothing's going to happen to me. I didn't
Right,
have a plan. Neither did any of my friends. But
right.
guess what? The sad reality is I lost some friends back then. One very close couple who were on their wedding night, who after the ceremony and the celebration, they were killed, both of
No.
them in a tragic car accident.
Oh no.
Another who rapidly lost her life to an aggressive form of cancer. This happened when I was in my mid to late 20s, early 30s. And I lost a couple of other good friends as well.
Mhm.
And while if you are young and you're listening and you think you're immortal, the truth is accidents and illness, they really don't give a shit what you think. What say you, Heidi?
You nailed it, John. There's really not much more to say about that. I mean, we've all lost people way before it should have been their time. I mean, we in high school, sophomore year, we lost one of our a tractor rolled over on a kid. I mean,
Oh
you
my
can't
gosh.
predict, yeah, you can't predict anything in life, really. There's the only certainty is at some point it'll be your day, but you have no guarantees as to when that's going to be. Preparing for it doesn't make it more likely to happen. I know there's a certain amount of superstition with people. Well, if I start talking about horrible things like death and incapacity and these horrible topics, that's going to make it more likely to happen. No, preventing it is going there is no real prevention. Instead, planning for it is going to let you sleep at night because if the worst thing ever does happen, you've already got a plan in place that's going to protect everything you've worked for and the people you love around you to the best that they can if you weren't there to do it yourself. So it's
What I say to those naysayers, those, oh, it's bad luck to talk about it. And audience has probably heard me say this before, but we talk about sex all the time. It does not make you pregnant talking about it.
I've
Talking
never heard
about,
that, John, but that's good.
feel free to use it. I'm sure
Yeah.
I stole it somewhere. Um,
Talking about
talking
drugs
about
doesn't
it.
get you high, right?
Exactly. Exactly. So, it just becomes so critical to make that plan. So
Yeah.
let's talk about, um, obviously, as soon as a child turns 18 years old, even though they're still my child, um, because of the laws, I have, really no voice or no say. I'll get
It,
it ultimately, but I can't find out information immediately,
it's
etc.
It's fascinating, really, because, they're on your health insurance until they're 26.
Right.
You're probably paying, very few 18 to 24-year-olds are financially independent. So it's usually you're taking care of most of their living expenses, but you don't get the same tax deduction for them, even though your expenses went up. And you have no voice whatsoever over their medical, their legal, their school records unless they give that to you. Now, thankfully, there are ways for you to do that. And frankly, parents, if you're the financial dollar paying for the young adult, you can reasonably make it conditional on them giving you some of those legal voices and things like that. And I would certainly consider doing that. But they have to assign a legal voice. If they fail to do that, they will have legal laryngitis, and it really is the court system making any of their decisions for them if they can't make a decision for themselves. So it's
So a
kind of a
young
scary.
single, so a
Yep.
young single person, say, as soon as they're 18, or even single in the mid-20s, at a minimum, what do they need? How easy is it to have that?
Really, it's about a 20-minute planning appointment to assign your legal voice. You're assigning who's going to be the, and it's interesting too, because you don't usually want two voices in the same role. So you're going to have to usually pick, do I want mom to be the first legal voice and dad the first medical? Do I want them both to be mom or both to be dad? You're making that decision, and who's second? And then who's third? What if something happens to your parents? You're kind of getting to list that back up. You're doing that both for your financial voice, for all of the legal matters, and for your medical decision making. You're also doing so those are two different forms. One's the durable financial power of attorney. And the next one is the health care power of attorney. I do them all in the same document, but some people separate and do a mental health care power of attorney. This is if you needed psychiatric substance abuse or psychological treatment, that the persons that you list could seek that for you when you can't do that for yourself. This becomes super important in situations like dementia, where you don't want guardianship to be able to provide care. Even with younger couples, substance abuse, they're out of control, being able to get them that help is a good thing. And then HIPAA waivers. This is the same form you fill out at your doctor. It's a federal form that you list the people who can talk to doctors and find out medical information, that have authorization and access. It does not give them a medical voice. It only gives them access, but they can ask questions and find out your medical status, which is still important. And then I would also add on, if you're going to do all of that, also do a living will, which is what if the worst things happen, under what circumstances would I want the plug to be pulled, right? Um, it's taking that burden off of the family members you love and giving the conditions to the doctor so that they're following your wishes. It just takes that burden off family members. It's not really expensive just to do that. When you start to have things, so when you're no longer 18, you're now in your 20s, you've got a car, you've got some tangible property, you've got some jewelry, you've got some tech, maybe it's time to start thinking about a will. There's just kind of a progress to this. When you don't have anything, what do you really need a will for? A will is to assign where your stuff goes. Now, when a will becomes really important is when you have a child.
There we go. Let's go into, now you're married. You may own a home. You've got some vehicles, retirement assets, and here comes baby.
Yep.
This
Well,
is where it gets
and you
sticky.
may not have done it all in that right order, but presuming
True.
you had, um, if you don't do a will, then you have not assigned guardianship for your kids. The single most important thing a will can ever do is assign guardianship for children. It's picking the person who, if you weren't there, would provide the most stability and love to your child during the greatest loss and trauma they will ever face. And failure to do this is, I mean, one of the worst things you could do to your child would be leave them in their worst possible state of trauma grief without a plan of where they should be to be cared for. So if you don't do that will, one of three things is going to happen. Best case scenario, you have one person who steps up to care for your child, and it's the one you might have happened to pick. That would be wonderful. At least they go to that best person who will care for them, get them through the grief as best they can, the way that you might have wanted them to do. Bad thing that could happen is there's more than one person that steps up, and now you've got family fighting, going to court with kids in the middle during a time of grief, being pulled and in a custody battle. I mean, it's bad enough when kids go through custody battles and divorce. You all know it, about 1 in 2 has had this experience where you've been in the middle of a custody battle and a divorce. Now imagine it when both parents are gone and you're in that same custody battle. That's pretty bad. But that's still not the worst thing that could happen. The worst thing that could happen is that nobody steps up. The kids are now part of the foster care system. They're orphaned. And if you know anything about that system, it's not one that's designed really to deal effectively with trauma care. Um, they may end up in a great home. It could happen, but so often we know the trajectory for kids who end up there, and it's usually not a positive one. So I know you want better than that for your kids. I know this is a really dark topic. I'm sorry. By its nature, it's a little bit of a dark. This is grief on steroids. Um, it's
We need to paint the nightmare scenario, and hopefully it never happens. But it
it's
does
it's so
happen to
easily
people.
preventable. It's so easily preventable, and there are choices. I think a lot of young couples delay getting a will mostly because they can't make that decision of guardian. They don't want to choose between the two sets of grandparents because they're both great. One wants his sister and the other one wants her brother and wife. And the couple can't come to terms with who to pick. So they just procrastinate it because let's face it, that's what the human brain does. It conserves calories. And when we've got a difficult thing, the tendency is to shut down and not deal with it. Well, any one of those good scenarios would have been better to assign in a will than the fighting. So I
Absolutely.
so I would say get it done. Now, the other option, sometimes I deal with parents who really they look at me and they say, we don't have a good sense for who would be the best guardian. We're weighing all these factors that we've talked about, who's going to love the kids, who's going to provide for the kids, who's going to provide the most stability to their own routine. Um, and by the way, if that person that we named is bad with money, that's not a problem. We can make someone else the steward of the money. We probably are going to use a trust to do that, not a will, but we have ways to make the person who's the guardian of your children not in control of the money. So I would never make a guardianship decision based on how good they are with money. I would do it based on how good they're going to be at getting your kid through the worst possible trauma of their life and raising them in an effective way that's comfortable and and safe and can hopefully grow them with your similar values. But really, it's about the love they're going to have in that home first.
Well,
Sorry.
if you love your brother a lot, but he's an atheist and you are a strong Catholic, then he might not be the bad choice. A good choice rather. He'd be the bad choice because he's not going to raise the child with your values, even though he loves the child, right? So yeah, it's a delicate balancing act.
It's a delicate balancing act. And you can potentially, if you go the will route, you're really just assigning guardianship. You really don't have a lot of the customization options. If you were to upgrade, and a lot of young couples don't, and I understand financially it can seem cost prohibitive, but the trust, if you were to go that route, it's going to come with the will that provides the guardianship piece, but it can do all kinds of other things like maybe it is the brother who would provide the best home, but his values aren't the same as yours, but it has conditions in it that the grandparents are going to pick up the kids and take them to church on Sunday. And the kid is still, for the, practical purposes, going to be raised in the faith. You can have those kinds of arrangements in something like a trust. Not in a will, but in something like a trust. Now, cool option that a lot of people don't talk about. Sometimes you really can't make a decision between the people for guardianship. So there is another option. It's called a guardianship panel. This is kind of an interesting idea. It allows you to pick, I usually recommend an odd number of people because it's going to be majority rule at a conference that they hold. You assign a temporary guardian who's going to take custody of the children initially when something goes wrong, and they're going to keep the kids. But then within a reasonable time frame, your panel would meet and they would have discussions together about, all right, long term, what's going to be the most consistent, who's going to provide them with love, who's going to be able to keep their life the most normal. And they're going to weigh those factors and make a decision together. And if the child's old enough, they can try to give a persuasive statement to that panel. Like there's a lot of clever things we can do in the guardianship space to solve problems, as long as you're willing to be the adult and engage the conversation in it and not just conserve the calories and decide you don't want to deal with it.
And that seems like a really good option for the ones who say, well, my family's here, your family's out there, it should be my brother, it should be your sister. You can't decide. Establishing the panel now, say, let's bring all these family members together to make the best possible choices. And if 5 years from now, it becomes crystal clear to you that it should be the sister, because she now has young kids, they're stable, they got a lot of money, you can change it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I would be really remiss in doing this topic if I didn't mention you really need to have a financial thing in place for those kids too, to be able to grow them up if you aren't there. I don't sell life insurance. I'm not here to sell life insurance, but a term life insurance policy that would cover your income at least to raise the kids as kind of a income replacement idea is an absolute adulting necessity. You have a child, there should be a life insurance policy that covers your income to raise that child if you're not there to do it.
And then I assume even if you don't have a trust initially, but you can specify that, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not an attorney, but I could specify in my will that the life insurance proceeds would then create and go into a trust, so that the person who is raising my child just doesn't all of a sudden get $1 million in their pocket and might not spend it in the correct way. Is that right?
You are correct. You can do what's called a testamentary trust. And that's, you're right. The trust is then created at your death, right? It's not created during your lifetime. There still isn't quite the, it's a middle option. It's kind of halfway between a will and a trust. It doesn't allow you the same level of customization and creativity. And I mean, because with a trust, really, we can say anything we want to that's legal. There's about two things you can't do in a trust. You can't make anyone go against public policy, like telling them they have to divorce the ugly scum-sucking pig, right? You can't say that. and you can't make someone commit any kind of illegal act. So, they can't kill anyone, they can't commit fraud. You can't do those two things. Quite apart from that, as long as the trustee would be willing to follow that instruction, you can put it in a trust and it can be followed. So trusts allow you to do things like, say, I want my kids to be able to vacation with extended family, even if that's not the custodial guardian. I want them to be engaged in extracurricular activities during their growing up years. I want them to have a car at 16 if they're moderately responsible, because I'm not there to shuttle them around, and I want them to have some freedom because I'm not there. I want them to, make sure that the money is continuously invested so that they have all the training that they would want in their young adult lives, for whatever vocation they're going to pursue. You can even put in restrictions like, we're not going to allow them to major in things that don't end up in a real career. Gender studies.
I love it.
Yeah. So there's
and so the life insurance then funds that trust, and then the money
correct.
is available for the things that you design in that trust, so that it doesn't become an added financial burden on that
Bingo.
loving family member that's going to rear your children. God forbid something happens.
Absolutely. And the trustee doesn't have to be the guardian. The trustee can be providing either to the guardian, directly to the child if they're old enough, to different institutions on the kids, on their behalf, so they could pay directly for extracurriculars, they could pay directly um, for private school, any of those kinds of things. The trustee can do that if we've got a guardian who maybe isn't so great with money, but is really good with the kids.
Yeah. Yeah.
So lots of
It,
options.
it's like Play-Doh or Legos. You can build whatever you want with that stuff, right?
Yes, you can. It's
Oh, well,
beautiful. It really is beautiful that the options you have at your disposal as a young couple, to take care of your kids. There are so many options out there, um, but you have to do something. You can't just put it on the back burner and say, that's not that important to me. Um, and we didn't even talk really about what do we do with your house, but that's very secondary, in my opinion, obviously, to what we're doing to take care of the kids.
right, right. Yeah, and those things all become critical because there are other assets, but obviously, I'm sure your 401k is going to transfer to your spouse and vice versa. They're named beneficiaries, but if you both go at the same time, that's where trust comes in handy because we should change those beneficiaries to just name the trust so the money goes into the pool, right?
Well, yeah, okay. I teach this, and I think most minds, there are reasonable minds that differ in this area. Okay, this is one of the places where attorneys do things differently, and you could talk to 5 different attorneys who all do this part differently. I never recommend putting pre-tax assets, the ones that you didn't pay taxes on when you created them, right? So IRAs, 401ks, 403bs, 457, those kinds of accounts. I never recommend putting those into a trust. They're the only things I leave out of a trust. I put property in the trust. I put all of your bank accounts in the trust. I put all your post-tax investments in the trust. Everything else can go in the trust, but I do leave those outside because the Secure Act that happened in 2019, and that's a whole nother podcast that I'm sure someone has already had. If not, it's one you need to have. There are tax consequences for putting those things inside the trust. So what I do is I leave them outside. The kids are not going to have access until they're usually 21. They're going to have a 10-year span where they have those between 21 and 31 if it's kept outside the trust. And we can still put advisory language for the trustee on how to balance out what they receive from those outside assets with what's distributed from the inside. So really the life insurance you can think of, the life insurance and the house are kind of the 2 big ones for young couples that are in the trust. And if they've got any outside investments, they're working for a company and doing 401k matching, that's the one thing outside. Really, the way the Secure Act works, you want to use those funds during your retirement. They're really not a good inheritance vehicle for your kids.
And that's why I asked the attorneys, folks, because I'm not the attorney, but I want the understanding to be there. So let me ask this question. What if someone has a Roth IRA, which is taxed? Still keep it outside, or is it less of an issue?
It's so that one can really go either way. I would probably put it in the trust. It has to be fully distributed within 10 years, but it's never taxed.
Right. Perfect.
So, because you paid tax on the income as you put it in, if you were eligible to create one of those. So you're going to not pay any taxes on any of the growth. So letting it grow inside or outside the trust doesn't really matter. It's just got to be fully distributed 10 years after the death of the person whose social security number it was in.
Love it. Love it. Hey, this is great stuff. And as we're winding down our time, and I really appreciate it because, um, you know, I, when, when my kids were young, I didn't know what I know about life and hadn't seen as many people die and the problems that they're created. And I didn't have a plan. And I was lucky. I made it through. But again, a lot don't. And it's sad. And we're not necessarily saying that it's both partners perish same time. It's important if just one perishes to have the trust in place and to have the necessary insurance, and to make sure that things are taken care of. So what one last piece of advice would you share with the audience, Heidi?
Okay. Last piece. Kind of got into this in my last podcast, but I would say it's worth repeating. For all the advice we gave so far when we started talking about kids was if you were married. If you are unmarried, and we're talking about kids, you have to really be strategic in what you do with ownership of assets. You definitely need an attorney. You need an attorney for medical and legal voice. You need an attorney for making sure that the deeds for property you buy is done in a way that makes sense. There are all kinds of complications. Let's face it, the law does favor marriage, especially when there are children. And so when you do that a different way, the law does not work on your side. You have to make the law adapt to your side, and that's going to take an attorney.
Yeah, great advice. Great advice. Um, and as always, Heidi is easy to reach out to. I'm going to put all of her contact information in the show notes. Her website, how to reach her, how to get a copy of her book. Follow her on social media. We'll have it all in there.
Thank you.
Say, Heidi, it is always such a pleasure talking to you. I love our conversations, and thanks for coming back on. And we'll do it again. Yeah, I'm grateful for it.
Anytime, John. I appreciate you. I appreciate My Life and Wishes. I definitely feel like it is the whipped cream and cherry on the top of all my estate plans to be able to give this to people and say, and we're going to make it easy for the people who take over for you when you're gone. I can't tell you what a relief that is for me to be able to provide that to clients. So thank you for that. And thank you for what
You're
you do.
you're so you're so generous. I appreciate you saying so. I like to say, our legacy vault is the missing piece to a complete estate plan, because end of life planning encompasses more than just the legal documents. It also is about making things easier for the families at the end of the day.
Absolutely.
So to our audience, again, thank you very much. If you are a young adult, if you are a young married couple, if you're a young married couple with assets, a young married couple with some assets, and you have children, please don't wait to get a plan in place. And for our slightly older crowd, if you have children, encourage them to get their planning done, because we just never know what tomorrow brings. So feel free again to reach out to Heidi. She is the Legacy Lifeguard. She will keep your legacies above water. And as always, my friends, your life is your legacy. So plan ahead and make it a great day.